Hello again, this is Mark with Evo Ballistics, and in this short video I'll show you all you need to know about how to position the EB Mark I, set up the position and alignment options, and then set your triggers for your shots. We begin on our user interface. We go to our settings, and then we can see that we have two highlighted tabs here. The first one is for the position and alignment, and the second is for the trigger and sensitivity. Of course, these are the most important settings, that's why they are highlighted. We'll begin with position and alignment. What you see right here is on the left side a basic representation of a top-down view on the radar with the weapon position highlighted here with the red point and the dotted line. The dotted line is our firing direction, and the red dot here, the main point here, is the muzzle of the weapon. As you can see right here, the black center of this graph, this would be the position of our radar sensor. We can see below that an angle, in this case a negative angle, and a lock symbol. In the top right corner here, we can see our exit distance and entry distance of the bullet into the radar beam. The radar beam itself has an 11-degree opening angle, so at 11.5 degrees here that we have set up, the bullet would exit the radar beam as well again. Now on the right side we have our position information of the weapon, and below that we have some of the angle information, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, what's the important things that we have to know when positioning the weapon in relation to the radar? Well, what we want to do first is we want to make sure that the muzzle is not in a dangerous position for the radar itself. So, of course, we want to have the muzzle in front of the radar, so we have no danger of actually hitting the, EB Mark I with our projectile in case we have moved the muzzle a bit. So generally I recommend a distance of about 15 to 20 centimeters of the muzzle in front of the radar here, and then also to the side also about 15 to 20 centimeters. 25 centimeters is also not a problem. If we want to set this in inches, by the way, this is also not a problem. That would be about 6 to 12 inches. 6 inches would be 15 centimeters, 12 inches is 30 centimeters, which would be about this position next to the radar. We simply input this information here in our screen. So we see right now the horizontal position is set to 20 centimeters. If we were to increase that distance to 30 centimeters and then deselect the screen here, we can see how the position of the muzzle has moved in our diagram. The same goes for the vertical position. Vertical position is not actually the position higher or lower. Instead, it's the position here in the screen. And that, since this is a top-down view, this is the position where the muzzle is in front or behind the EB Mark I. If we set this to 30 centimeters here, we can see the muzzle move to the front. And that way we have now a 45-degree angle here, as we can see in the diagram. Next up, we have the height of the weapon. This is actually the position above the ground. This is not the position relative to the radar itself. In this case, we have it set up to 100 centimeters because that's about the distance of the radar from the ground here when it's set on the table. Lastly, we have the tilt angle of the weapon in degrees. This is not this angle here. Instead, that is the angle with which the weapon might be pointed upwards or downwards, depending on if we're shooting uphill or downhill or somewhere within a set angle. This information is not needed necessarily for most calculations. This is just for the basic reference if you need this information. The angle, by the way, does not have to be in degrees. You can also set this in MOA, minutes of angle. This is always a 60th of a degree, or in the military style mils or milliradians. You can switch this over here however you like. If we have, for example, 1 degree, which I'm going to set here right now, and then switch it to MOA, it will automatically change this to the 60. The same goes for the mils. This, of course, is not a nice angle in this case, but well, if you are so inclined, this is what you can input here as well. Lastly, the important angle here, this is the angle with which the radar is looking towards your rifle, or the firing direction. You do not actually have to manually measure this angle. Instead, what we do is we first position the radar exactly in the same direction, parallel to your firing direction, and then press this button down here, the Start at 0 button. In that case, you can see down here how the lock symbol has now unlocked and turned red. That means it's now open to be adjusted. And once I start moving the EB Mach 1 here, you can see how the angle is automatically measured by the radar itself. When I have selected a suitable angle, which by the way would be generally between 5 and 15 degrees, don't care about the negative in this case, in that position you will get the best results. We can see here at minus 10 degrees we would have an entry position of the muzzle of the bullet into the radar beam at less than 1 meter's distance, and the bullet would exit the radar beam at slightly over 3 meters. Of course, this is a very short distance to measure. So if we want to measure the projectile for a longer distance, we would then start reducing the angle again. So we can see here at just 7.2 degrees, the bullet would enter at a distance of just over 1 meter, and we would track the bullet up until about 10 meters. If we further reduce this down to less than 5.5 degrees, we can see that the exit distance is now infinite. Of course, we can't track the projectile for that extreme distance, but theoretically, we would still have the projectile in our radar beam. The maximum distances, which we can usually get proper measurements for, are between 50 and 100 meters, but that is only under optimal conditions. Now, lastly, we then, once we have selected our proper angle, we press the Set button, and that locks the EB Mach 1 in place again. So if I now turn the EB Mach 1, the angle would not be measured anymore. In order to not mess this up, what we usually do is we start the measurement, we turn the EB Mach 1 the way we need it, and then we fix it in place, usually on the tripod, to make sure that the angle doesn't change after fixing it. Now that it is fixed in place, we can see that the angle when I fixed it has just slightly changed again, but that is not a problem in this case. And then I press the Set button. In case I accidentally press the Start at 0 button, like now, but I don't want to readjust the EB Mach 1 again, I then have the option to press the Cancel button here, and it will go back to the initial position that we had selected before that. Finally, we have the outdoor and indoor selection button here. This doesn't actually do anything for the measurement itself. It just points up a flag that shows that if you look at the shot later on again, was it indoor or outdoor taken. One last point that I almost forgot here is of course the button down here, the left and right button. Right now we are set with the EB Mach 1 positioned to the right of our weapon, but in case we want to shoot from the right side of the EB Mach 1, we simply press the button here and the system switches around. After setting our EB Mach 1 in the correct position, we then switch over to the Trigger and Sensitivity tab. What we can do here is set up the trigger mechanism of the EB Mach 1, because once you press the arming button on the dashboard, once the trigger moment happens, only then does the EB Mach 1 actually take the measurement. It will continuously record, but only once the trigger moment happens, it actually saves that recorded information. And for that, we have multiple options here. First, what we can see right now is the microphone selection. This is technically our backup option. And we see at the moment that the middle screen, which is for the radar option, the second one, that is currently disabled. So for the microphone first, right now it's set to a sensitivity of 24, and we can see our symbol here for the microphone showing up as red. That means that right now at this sensitivity, the microphone would already be triggering a measurement. That is just from the background noise and me talking right now. What we do in this case is we reduce the sensitivity here until the microphone shows up as black again, just like this here. I'm going to go just on the very edge between the 20, where we can see it's now triggering, down to 19, where it's not. And now even the smallest little bit of noise close to the EB Mach 1 would start the measurement. So I'm just going to snap my fingers, and we can see how the microphone just flashes very briefly. And that means now the microphone is very, very sensitively set up for the measurement. The same would be done for the radar, basically. We switch it over. Now the microphone option is disabled, so in case you're on a very busy range, the other shots from other shooters on the range might trigger with the microphone option. In this case, with the radar option, there can be other shooters right next to you, and measurements would still be taken properly by yours. Now, the threshold here right now is set to 96. If we increase this to just about 100, we can see also that the symbol down here, which is the radar wave now, that is now showing up as red, which means just from the background noise, just the regular movement of anything in the distance, that would already start the measurement. We reduce once again the sensitivity here a little bit until we are just below that. And in order to test this process, we now only have to have something move very fast in front of the radar, and that can be done even via just your hand. So right now I'm going to position my hand in front of the radar. I'm just going to move the hand very fast in front of the radar. And we can see how the flashes on the screen indicate that that would be enough to start the measurement. Lastly, for the third slider here, this is a general sensitivity slider for the measurement. This is not for the sensitivity to trigger the measurement. This is for the actual signal strength. Because depending on what kind of caliber you're shooting, obviously we will get a different kind of strength of the signal back. So if we're shooting something like a .22 long rifle, that obviously is a very small projectile, which would not create a very strong signal compared to something like a 50 BMG rifle. So right now it's set to 131. This is just about the average setting, which works for basically any kind of projectile. But if you know that you're shooting something very, very small, that is not very easy to track, we may as well increase the sensitivity to somewhere around 200. And if we're shooting something very large, like let's say a 40mm grenade, for example, we can then decrease the sensitivity down to about 60, 70. That should be good enough here. The way you can find out if your sensitivity is properly set is by using the test shot function. This is what the button down here is. This is very similar to the arming button, but instead of giving you all the information once the shot is done, it will only give you the actual measurement, the first measurement for the velocity, and it will also give you a signal strength analysis. When the signal strength is very low, there are two things that you can do. Option one is to increase the sensitivity. Very simple. The other option is adjusting your shooting position. We have another video which targets this specific very, very much because it's very difficult to show without actual shots. That's why we have a specific video for this. But if your sensitivity cannot be further increased without actually failing the measurements, that's when you definitely have to make an adjustment in the position of your muzzle. Lastly, we then have our distance set up. These are the ranges that will be displayed right after your shot on the dashboard. The EB Mark 1 automatically calculates for you your velocities at these ranges, so you don't have to have ranges that are actually within your measurement distance. If I set range number 5, for example, to 300 meters here, that would still work. It will then calculate for you your velocity and energy for the projectile at those distances. If you make an adjustment here, do not forget to press the save button. Only once you press the button, these data are saved. The settings for the sensitivity generally, they don't have to be saved, because as soon as you make a change here, of course you saw that the measurements are already taken there to test if it works, so you don't have to save that because it's already applied these changes. And this is basically how you set up a measurement with the EB Mark 1 here. Just these two, the general settings, units, and everything else. This doesn't have to be adjusted every time you take a shot, but whenever you set up the EB Mark 1 for a new measurement, be it on a new range or with a different weapon and ammunition combination, for example, you should always make sure to check your position and alignment and trigger and sensitivities.